The dust devil spun across the barren stretch of land where nothing had grown in 7 years. But Clara Whitmore knelt in that unforgiving dirt with a tin bucket of water and a basket of seedlings like she was planting in Eden itself. The year was 1881, and the Texas panhandle had become a graveyard of failed homesteads and broken dreams. Most folks had the good sense to pack up and head somewhere the earth still remembered how to be generous. But Clara had staked her claim on this 40 acres of stubborn ground 3 months back and hadn't shown any signs of leaving. She was 22 years old, alone except for a mule named Bartholomew, and apparently convinced she could will life into soil that looked more like ash than earth. Garrett Walsh saw her from a quarter-mile out, a small figure in a faded blue dress bent over what appeared to be perfectly straight rows of disturbed dirt. He had been riding fence line for the Broken Arrow Ranch when the wind shifted and carried the impossible scent of disturbed earth and moisture. In this drought, that combination was strange enough to investigate. He was 26, tall and lean from years of hard work, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water when the sun hit it just right. He had been working cattle since he was 14, and he knew this land like he knew the scars on his own hands. Nothing grew here anymore. Nothing could, but as he rode closer, he saw she had done something remarkable with what little she had. There was a rough wooden fence marking off maybe a quarter acre, and inside that fence the ground had been turned and worked until it almost looked like real garden soil. A rain barrel sat propped up on stones at one corner, fed by a contraption of tin gutters that would catch any rain that fell. Except, rain was just a memory in these parts lately. Clara looked up when his shadow fell across her work. She had light brown hair pulled back in a braid that had mostly come undone, and her face was sunburned across the nose and cheeks. Her hands were wrapped in strips of cloth that were stained with dirt and what might have been blood from broken blisters. She squinted up at him without standing, one hand still pressed around a tiny tomato plant she had just settled into the earth. "Help you with something?" she asked, and her voice carried the flat vowels of somewhere back east. Pennsylvania, maybe, or Ohio. Garrett pushed his hat back and looked around at her impossible garden. "Just riding through, saw what you were doing here and figured I had to be seeing things." "Why would you be seeing things?" She patted the dirt firm around the seedling and moved to the next hole she had dug, this one waiting for what looked like a bean plant. "Because nothing grows in this dirt, ma'am, hasn't for years. Drought took everything." Clara rocked back on her heels and looked up at him with an expression that suggested she had heard this particular speech before and found it tiresome. "Everything grows somewhere if you treat it right. Dirt is dirt. It just needs help remembering what it is supposed to do." Garrett dismounted because this conversation seemed like it might take a while, and because he was genuinely curious about what she thought she was accomplishing. His horse, a patient gray mare named Tess, immediately tried to find something to eat among the scrub and found nothing worth the effort. "Dirt is not just dirt out here," he said, keeping his tone polite but honest. "The sun bakes it 8 months out of the year, the wind strips anything that tries to take root, and there hasn't been meaningful rain since April. That was 5 months back. I know when it rained last." Clara settled the bean plant and moved on to the next. She worked with steady efficiency, like she had done this 1,000 times. "I have been hauling water from the creek 3 miles east every single day since I got here. I have been working compost into this soil from kitchen scraps and anything else I can find. I have been breaking up the hardpan underneath so roots can actually go deep. And I will keep doing it until things grow, because they will grow. I am not giving up on this land just because it is having a hard time." There was something in the way she said it that made Garrett think she was not just talking about the land. He crouched down a few feet away, picked up a handful of the soil she had been working. It was different from the surrounding dirt, darker and with more texture. She had actually managed to improve it somehow. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "Indiana. Little town outside Fort Wayne. My father had a farm there." She did not elaborate, and Garrett knew better than to push. People came west for all kinds of reasons, and most of those reasons involved leaving something behind. And you came out here to farm 40 acres of the worst land in Texas. I came out here because it was what I could afford. Clara sat back and wiped her forehead with the back of one wrapped hand, leaving a smear of dirt across her temple. The land office in Fort Griffin told me this parcel had been abandoned twice. They let it go for almost nothing. So yes, it is the worst land, but it is my land, and I intend to make something of it. Garrett studied her for a long moment. She was thin, probably not eating enough because she was spending everything on seed and supplies instead of food. Her dress had been mended in at least 6 places that he could see. The soles of her boots were separating from the uppers, but her jaw was set with the kind of determination he usually saw in pack mules, and her eyes were clear and steady. "You know anything about this country?" he asked. "About what it takes to survive out here. I know I have survived 3 months so far. I know I have a roof that does not leak and a mule that pulls when I need him to pull. I know I have these seedlings in the ground now, and I have more waiting. I know that whether folks think it is possible or not does not actually change what is possible. It just changes what they are willing to try." Garrett found himself smiling despite his better judgment. "You always this stubborn?" "Always," Clara said, and for the first time a hint of humor touched her expression. "My mother used to say I would argue with a fence post if I thought it was wrong about something." "What happened to your mother?" The humor faded. "Fever 4 years back. My father followed 6 months later. Heart just gave out. After that, my brother got the farm because that is how it works, and his wife made it clear I was not needed. So I sold what I could, took the money, and came west to find something of my own. And you chose this." Garrett gestured at the hard land surrounding them. "I chose this," Clara confirmed. She planted the last seedling in her basket and stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "You have any other observations about my poor judgment, or can I offer you some water before you ride on?" He should have ridden on. He had work waiting back at the ranch, and getting involved with a stubborn homesteader who was going to fail despite her best efforts was not a smart use of his time. But he heard himself saying, "Water would be good, thank you." Her soddy was small but surprisingly neat, built into a low rise so that 3 walls were earth and only the front was exposed. The roof was a combination of wooden beams, sod, and what looked like an old canvas tarp lashed down against the wind. A narrow chimney made of stacked stones poked through one side. It was the kind of dwelling that would be miserably hot in summer and freezing in winter, but it was shelter, and out here that counted for something. Inside was dim and cool, with barely enough room for a narrow cot, a small table, 2 chairs, and a cast-iron stove that probably served for both cooking and heat. Everything was organized with almost military precision. Bags of seed hung from pegs on the wall. Tools were lined up by size. A shelf held a few books, some jars of preserved food, and a daguerreotype in a simple frame. Clara poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to him. The water was surprisingly cool and clean, with no hint of the alkali taste that plagued most of the wells around here. "You get this from the creek?" Garrett asked. "Every day, like I said, 3 miles each way. I make the trip twice on hot days. That is a lot of hauling. That is what it takes." She poured herself a cup and drank deeply, and he could see the weariness in the way she moved. She was exhausted, working herself to the bone trying to make this impossible thing happen. "The Broken Arrow has a decent well," Garrett said slowly, working through an idea even as he spoke it. "It is about 2 miles from here. I could talk to Mr. Patterson, the ranch owner, about you using it. Would save you a mile each trip." Clara looked at him with surprise. "Why would you do that?" "Because hauling water 6 miles a day is going to break you down, and I have never seen anyone try this hard to make something work." He finished the water and set the cup on the table. "Also, because anyone stubborn enough to plant a garden in dirt like this probably belongs out here, even if she does not know what she is in for yet." Something shifted in Clara's expression, a softening around the eyes that suggested she did not hear many kind words these days. "That would help considerably, thank you. I will talk to him this evening. Come by tomorrow and I will let you know what he says." Garrett moved toward the door, then paused. "You have a gun?" "Yes, rifle. I know how to use it." "Good." "We get drifters sometimes, and not all of them are friendly. You see anyone coming that you do not like the look of, you make sure they see you are armed." "I will. Thank you for the concern." Garrett stepped back out into the bright heat and untied Tess. Clara followed him out, standing in the narrow strip of shade cast by her sadi. "I am Clara Whitmore, by the way," she said. "Since you are going to help me, you might as well know my name. Garrett Walsh. I work for the Broken Arrow. Nice to meet you, Garrett Walsh." She offered her hand, and when he shook it, he could feel the hardness of new calluses and the strength in her grip. He rode back toward the ranch with his mind turning over the problem of Clara Whitmore and her impossible garden. Patterson was a fair man, practical but not unkind. If Garrett explained the situation right, he would probably allow her to use the well. It cost the ranch nothing, and Patterson had always said that helping neighbors when you could was just part of living in hard country. But beyond the immediate problem of water, Garrett found himself thinking about Clara herself, about the determination in her voice when she talked about making the land work, about the way she had wrapped her bleeding hands and kept planting anyway, about the loneliness that must come with working a homestead alone, with nothing but a mule for company and the nearest town a day's ride away. He had been alone most of his adult life by choice, content with the work and the sky and the simple rhythms of ranching. But something about seeing her kneeling in that impossible garden had stirred something he had thought long settled. A recognition, maybe, of someone who understood what it meant to commit to something difficult simply because it mattered. The Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across 8,000 acres of slightly better land than what Clara had claimed, though it too had suffered from the drought. The main house was a sturdy building of whitewashed adobe with a wide porch and actual glass in the windows. The bunkhouse where Garrett stayed with the other ranch hands was rougher but comfortable enough. There were barns and corrals, a smokehouse, a root cellar, and all the infrastructure of a working ranch that had been in operation for 15 years. Garrett found Jack Patterson in the barn, checking over a horse that had thrown a shoe that morning. Patterson was in his 50s, weathered and gray but still strong, with a drooping mustache and eyes that missed nothing. "Got a question for you, boss," Garrett said, leaning against the stall door. Patterson looked up from the horse's hoof. "Ask it." "There is a homesteader about 2 miles west of here, woman alone, trying to work a garden in that dead stretch past Copper Creek. She has been hauling water from the creek daily. I told her I would ask if she could use our well instead, save her some distance." Patterson set the horse's hoof down and straightened. "A woman alone? What is she, some widow?" "No, sir. Just someone who bought land cheap and is trying to make it work. She is not asking for charity, just access to water. I figured it does not cost us anything, and it is the neighborly thing." "She pretty?" Patterson asked, and there was a glint of humor in his eyes. Garrett felt his face warm. "That is not relevant to the question, sir. It is if you are asking because you are sweet on her. I just met her today. I am asking because it is the right thing to do." Patterson studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, she can use the well. But you make sure she knows that if we run into problems with water ourselves, she will have to go back to the creek. Drought gets worse, we might need every drop." "I will tell her. Thank you, sir." "This woman got a name?" "Clara Whitmore." "Never heard of her. She been here long?" 3 months, she said. Patterson shook his head slowly. 3 months alone on a failing homestead. That is a hard way to live. You make sure she knows she is welcome to come to the main house if she needs help, you understand. We are not going to have a woman starving to death 2 miles from our door. Yes, sir, I will tell her. That night, Garrett lay in his bunk and listened to the sounds of the other ranch hands settling in around him. Charlie was snoring already, a rattling sound that could wake the dead. Tom was reading by lamplight, lips moving as he worked through the words of some dime novel. Miguel was cleaning his saddle gear, the smell of leather oil sharp in the close air. Garrett closed his eyes and saw Clara's garden, those straight rows of turned earth like an act of faith in the face of all evidence. He saw her wrapped hands pressing seedlings into the ground, her sunburned face set with concentration. He heard her voice saying that dirt just needed help remembering what it was supposed to do. He wondered what she was doing right now, alone in that tiny soddy. Whether she was reading one of those few books by lamplight, or lying awake worrying about whether the seeds would sprout, or already asleep from sheer exhaustion. He wondered why he cared. The next morning, Garrett rode out to Clara's place before starting his regular work. The sun was just clearing the horizon, turning the sky shades of orange and gold that would have been beautiful if they had not promised another scorching day. Clara was already awake, already working. She was mucking out the small lean to where her mule spent the nights, pitchforking soiled straw into a wheelbarrow. She had her hair tied back with a faded ribbon, and she was humming something under her breath, some tune he did not recognize. "Morning," Garrett called out so he would not startle her. She looked up, shading her eyes against the low sun. "Morning, you are out early. Wanted to catch you before you made the trip to the creek. Patterson said you are welcome to use the Broken Arrow well. I can show you where it is." Clara set the pitchfork aside and walked over, and he saw relief wash across her face. "That is wonderful news. Thank you. Let me just finish this and I can follow you over." "I will help you finish. We will get done twice as fast." They worked in companionable silence, clearing out the soiled straw and spreading fresh. The mule, Bartholomew, watched them with patient eyes and occasionally snuffled at Garrett's shoulder looking for treats. "He likes you," Clara observed. "Most animals do." "I have always gotten along better with horses and cattle than people." "Why is that?" Garrett pitched another forkful into the wheelbarrow. "Animals do not talk much, makes things simpler." Clara laughed, a real laugh that transformed her whole face. "Fair enough. Though I imagine you do all right with people too, or you would not have convinced your boss to let a stranger use his well. Patterson is a good man. He believes in helping when he can." "And what do you believe in?" Clara asked, and there was genuine curiosity in the question. Garrett paused, considering. "I believe in doing your work and doing it right. I believe in keeping your word. I believe the land will take care of you if you take care of it, though that is harder to prove in a drought. And I believe most people are decent if you give them the chance to be." "Those are good things to believe in." Clara dumped the last of the fresh straw and spread it with her hands. "I believe in most of those too, especially the part about keeping your word." They rode over to the Broken Arrow together, Clara on her mule and Garrett on Tess. The well was situated between the main house and the bunkhouse, a solid stone structure with a good rope and bucket. Garrett showed her how the pulley system worked, though she clearly already understood the mechanics. "You can come whenever you need to," he said. "Morning is probably best, before the day gets too hot. Most of the hands will be out working by then, so you will not be in anyone's way." "I will not be in the way regardless," Clara said with a touch of defensiveness. "I know how to keep to myself." "I did not mean it like that." "I just meant you will have privacy," she softened. "I know, I am sorry. I'm not used to people helping without wanting something in return." "I do not want anything in return." Clara met his eyes, searching for something. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded. "All right. Thank you, Garrett. This means more than you probably realize." Over the following weeks, Garrett saw Clara regularly. She came to the well each morning like clockwork, filling her buckets and hauling them back to her garden. Sometimes he was there working on some task or another, and they would exchange a few words. Sometimes he made sure he was there, finding excuses to be near the well at dawn, though he did not examine too closely why he did that. He watched her garden with the fascination of witnessing something that should not be possible. The seedlings did not die. Against all logic and reason, they took root in that improved soil and began to grow. Not quickly, not with the vigor they would have shown in better conditions, but they grew. Tiny tomato plants put out leaves. Bean plants climbed the stakes she had set for them. Squash plants spread cautiously outward. Other people noticed too. Charlie rode past her place one day and came back to the bunkhouse shaking his head. "That crazy woman has got green shoots coming up in that dead ground. I saw it with my own eyes." "How is that possible?" "Hard work," Garrett said simply. "Hard work does not change soil and weather," Tom pointed out. "Maybe not, but it can make a difference around the edges. And sometimes that is enough." Miguel, who had been listening quietly, said, "My grandmother would say she has good spirit, that woman. The earth responds to people who treat it with respect." "The earth responds to water and nutrients," Tom said, ever practical. "Then she is giving it water and nutrients," Garrett said, ending the conversation. But privately, he thought Miguel might be onto something. There was a quality to the way Clara worked that went beyond simple technique. She touched the plants gently as she tended them, spoke to them sometimes when she thought no one was listening. She celebrated each new leaf, each inch of growth like they were personal victories. And maybe they were. He started finding reasons to ride past her place, checking the fence line in that direction more often than necessary. Sometimes he brought things. A better pair of work gloves when he saw how torn hers were. A bag of real coffee, not the chicory blend, because he had heard her mention missing coffee from home. A jar of salve for her son's damaged skin, which he left on her doorstep anonymously because he lost his nerve about giving it to her directly. Clara never mentioned the gifts, but the gloves appeared on her hands and the coffee scent drifted from her sadi in the mornings, so he knew she had accepted them. 6 weeks after their first meeting, Garrett was helping her reinforce the fence around her garden. The wood was rough and mismatched, scraps she had salvaged from somewhere, but it served its purpose of keeping out the occasional rabbit or deer desperate enough to venture into the open. "You are spending a lot of time helping me," Clara observed, holding a post steady while he hammered. "Do not you have your own work to do?" "I do my work. This is just during my free time." "Why?" she asked it bluntly, meeting his eyes over the fence post. "Why do you keep coming back here, Garrett?" He set the hammer down, considering his answer carefully. "Because what you are doing here matters. Because you are trying to make something grow in a place everyone else gave up on, and I think that takes courage. Because I like watching you prove everyone wrong about what is possible." "Is that all?" Clara asked quietly. "No," Garrett admitted. "It is not all. I come back because I like talking to you. I like the way you do not give up. I like that you see this dead ground and imagine a garden. I like being around someone who believes in things that strongly." Clara was quiet for a moment and he worried he had said too much, pushed too hard. But then she smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made something in his chest tighten. "I like when you visit," she said. "The work is lonely sometimes. It is nice to have someone to talk to. Someone who does not think I am completely insane for being out here." "Oh, I think you are a little bit insane," Garrett said, and was rewarded with her laugh. They finished the fence as the sun climbed toward noon, the heat building to something oppressive. Clara wiped her face with her sleeve and looked at the garden with satisfaction. The plants were noticeably bigger than they had been even a week ago, thriving despite the harsh conditions. "They are really growing," Garrett said, impressed despite himself. "They are. Another few weeks I should be able to harvest some beans. The tomatoes will take longer, but they are setting flowers. I might actually have tomatoes, Garrett, real tomatoes from this impossible dirt." Her joy was infectious and he found himself grinning. "You are going to prove everyone wrong." "I am going to prove the land is not dead, just resting, waiting for someone to care enough to help it wake up." She touched one of the tomato plants with careful fingers. "That is true of most things, I think. People, places, dreams, they are not dead, just waiting for the right attention." Garrett understood she was talking about more than gardening, and something shifted between them in that moment. An acknowledgement of possibilities, of the space between what was and what might be. "Clara," he started, not entirely sure what he was going to say. But before he could finish, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted. They both turned to see 3 riders approaching at a fast pace, trailing dust. Garrett's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, then relaxed slightly when he recognized 2 of them as Broken Arrow hands. The third was a stranger. The riders pulled up at the edge of Clara's property. One of the Broken Arrow men was Frank, a veteran ranch hand in his 40s. "Garrett, boss wants you back at the ranch. We got a situation with some cattle gone missing, possible rustlers." Garrett nodded, already moving toward Tess. "I will be right there." He looked back at Clara. "You will be all right. I will be fine. Go." He wanted to say more, to finish the conversation they had been starting, but there was no time. He swung into the saddle and rode out with the others, looking back once to see Clara standing by her garden, one hand raised in farewell. The rustling situation consumed the next 3 days. Patterson organized search parties to track the missing cattle, and they spent long hours in the saddle covering miles of rough country. They found the cattle eventually, being driven east by a group of men who scattered when confronted. No shots were fired, thankfully, but it was a tense business that required vigilance. When Garrett finally made it back to Clara's place, he was exhausted and trail-worn. It was evening, the sun setting in streaks of red and purple. He almost turned back, thinking she would be asleep, but lamplight showed through the gaps around her door. He knocked softly. "Clara, it is Garrett." The door opened, and Clara looked at him with concern. "You look terrible. Come in, sit down." He was too tired to argue. He sank into one of her chairs while she poured water and set about heating something on the stove. It turned out to be soup, thin but hot, with vegetables and some kind of meat. "You need to eat," she said, setting a bowl in front of him, "and then you need to sleep." What happened? Between spoonfuls of soup, he told her about the rustlers and the long chase. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she shook her head. "This is dangerous country." "It can be. Mostly it is just hard. Dangerous is rarer. Still, you take risks out there. We all take risks." "You are taking risks just being out here alone." Clara refilled his bowl without asking. "Maybe. But I think the bigger risk would have been staying where I was not wanted, living a half-life because it was safe. At least here I am building something that is mine. That is worth the risk." Garrett looked at her across the small table, at the determination in her face and the gentleness in the way she moved. He thought about the garden growing in dead soil, about seedlings that refused to die, about the sheer force of will it took to create something beautiful in a harsh place. "I think about you a lot," he said quietly. "When I am out there riding, I think about your garden and wonder how the plants are doing. I think about whether you are safe, whether you have enough to eat, whether you are lonely. I know I do not have the right to think about those things, but I do anyway." Clara set the soup pot down carefully and looked at him. "You do have the right. If I have the right to think about you when I am working out here alone, wondering if you are safe, if you are eating properly, if you ever think about me. We both have the right to think about each other, Garrett." He stood, and so did she, and they faced each other in the small space of her sadi. The lamp cast flickering shadows on the earthen walls. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the endless whisper of the prairie. "I want to court you properly," Garrett said. "If you would allow it, I want to come visit not just to help with work but because I care about you. I want to see where this might go between us." Clara stepped closer, and he could see the emotions moving across her face. Hope, uncertainty, something that might have been relief. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much, but you need to understand, Garrett. I am not leaving this land. I am not giving up on what I am building here, not for anything or anyone. If you are courting me, you are courting someone who has their roots in this stubborn ground." "I would not want it any other way," Garrett said. "Anyone who can make a garden grow in the driest dirt is exactly the kind of stubborn I am looking for." Clara smiled, and then she was in his arms, and he was holding her like she was something precious, because she was. They stood like that for a long time, not kissing, just holding on, 2 lonely people who had found each other against all odds. When Garrett finally rode back to the ranch that night, the The stars were bright overhead and he felt lighter than he had in years. The world was still hard and the drought was still happening, and Clara's garden was still an impossible thing fighting against nature. But none of that mattered as much as the feeling of her in his arms, the promise of what they might build together. The courting that followed was unlike any romance the other ranch hands had ever witnessed. Garrett would ride over to Clara's place in the evenings after his work was done, and instead of sitting on a porch or going for strolls, they would work together in her garden. He helped her build a trellis for the climbing beans. He hauled rocks to make a border that would help retain water. He learned the names of all her plants and listened as she explained her techniques for keeping them alive. In return, Clara came to the ranch sometimes on Sundays, the one day Garrett had mostly free. She would bring vegetables from her garden, the first fruits of her impossible labor, and share them with the ranch hands. Those beans and early tomatoes, grown in soil that should have supported nothing, became legendary among the Broken Arrow crew. "That woman is a miracle worker," Charlie declared one Sunday, eating a fresh tomato like it was the finest delicacy. "This tastes like something from a proper farm, not from that dead ground. She works hard," Garrett said, but he could not keep the pride from his voice. Miguel grinned at him. "You got it bad, my friend. When is the wedding? We are courting, not engaged." "Yet," Tom added, "not engaged yet." "But you will be. Man does not look at a woman the way you look at her unless he is planning on marrying her." Garrett did not deny it because it was true. He had started thinking about marriage, about what it would mean to combine his life with Clara's. He had some money saved, enough to buy a small piece of land if he wanted to leave the Broken Arrow. Or maybe Patterson would let him build a cabin on ranch land, something better than Clara's soddy. They could expand her garden, maybe even try some proper farming if the drought ever broke. But he wanted to do this right, to give her time and make sure she was certain. So he kept his proposals to himself and focused on showing her through his actions that he was committed to her and to what she was building. 3 months into their courtship in late October, the weather began to change. The brutal heat broke, replaced by cooler days and chilly nights. The sky, which had been endlessly blue and cloudless, began to show formations. High cirrus clouds at first, then thicker cumulus. Clara watched the sky constantly, hope and anxiety warring in her expression. "Do you think it will rain?" she asked Garrett one evening as they sat outside her soddy, watching the sunset paint the clouds in shades of orange and pink. "Maybe. Sky looks like it wants to." "But wanting and doing are different things out here." "If it rains," Clara said slowly, "if it really rains, not just a sprinkle but a proper rain, the garden will explode. Everything I have been keeping alive will thrive. I could plant more, I could expand. And if it does not rain, then I keep hauling water and doing what I have been doing. It is working, Garrett, slowly, but it is working." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Her hands were still calloused, still marked by hard work, but they were strong. Everything about Clara was strong, even when she was tired. "You are working," he said. "The garden is just evidence." She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat like that as the sun disappeared and the stars emerged. The wind had died down to almost nothing, and in the stillness they could hear the distant call of coyotes and the closer sound of insects beginning their night songs. "Garrett," Clara said quietly, "what do you see when you look ahead? At the future, I mean." "I see you," he said simply. "I see us. I see that garden of yours becoming something bigger. I see a house, a real house with windows and a proper door. I see mornings waking up next to you and evenings working together. I see a life that matters, built on hard work and stubbornness and love." Clara lifted her head to look at him. "Love? Yes, love. I love you, Clara. I think I have loved you since I saw you planting in that impossible dirt, refusing to accept that it could not be done. You are the most remarkable person I have ever met." Tears shone in her eyes, reflecting the starlight. "I love you too. I have been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or that I was being foolish. But I love you, Garrett Walsh. You saw what I was trying to do and you did not laugh. You helped." You believed in me when I was not sure I believed in myself anymore. That means everything." He kissed her then, properly, deeply, pouring all his feelings into it. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know we should probably wait longer, but marry me, Clara. Let me help you build this dream, let me be part of what you are creating here." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in Fort Griffin, the nearest town of any size. It was a simple ceremony at the church, with Patterson and his wife standing as witnesses, along with Miguel and a few other ranch hands who made the trip. Clara wore a new dress, simple blue calico that she had sewn herself, and she carried a bouquet of herbs from her garden. Garrett wore his best clothes, which were not much, but he had shaved and gotten his hair cut, and Clara told him he looked handsome, so that was enough. The preacher was an elderly man who had seen hundreds of these frontier marriages, practical unions born of loneliness and necessity as much as love. But he paused in the standard ceremony to look at them both and say, "You two have something special. I can see it. Hold on to that. This country is hard on marriages, hard on dreams, but if you keep choosing each other, keep working together, you will make it." They exchanged simple gold bands that Garrett had purchased with his saved wages, and then they were married, husband and wife, for better or worse. The ranch hands had organized a small celebration back at the Broken Arrow. There was food and music, with Tom playing a fiddle he had never mentioned owning. They danced in the yard between the main house and the bunkhouse, Clara's laughter ringing out as Garrett spun her clumsily through the steps. He was not a good dancer, but she did not seem to care. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Patterson pulled Garrett aside. "I have been thinking," the ranch owner said. "You are a married man now, you cannot be living in the bunkhouse with the other hands, and your wife cannot keep living in that soddy, so I have a proposition." "Sir." "There is that old line shack up on the north section, the one near Copper Creek. It is not much, but it is a real building with 4 walls and a good roof. Needs some work, but it is livable. You fix it up, you and Clara can live there. You will still work for me, but you will have your own place. And that is close enough to her land that she can keep working her garden." Garrett felt gratitude surge through him. "Mr. Patterson, that is incredibly generous. You are a good worker, Garrett, and you have been with me for years. This is me investing in keeping you around. Plus, your wife grows vegetables in dirt that should not support weeds. I figure that kind of skill is worth encouraging. Maybe she can teach some of us a thing or two. Thank you, sir. We will take good care of the place." When Garrett told Clara, she threw her arms around him with such enthusiasm they nearly fell over. A real cabin with actual walls. "Oh, Garrett, we can make it wonderful. We can build furniture and put up curtains and have a real home." They spent their first night as a married couple in Clara's soddy, which was now decidedly cramped with both of them and their combined belongings. But neither of them minded. They lay together on the narrow cot, talking in whispers about their plans, about the future they would build. And when talking turned to other things, to the physical expression of the love they had declared, they came together with tenderness and passion, creating their own warmth against the cooling night. The next morning, they began the work of moving to the line shack. It was, as Patterson had said, not much to look at. The cabin was perhaps 12 feet by 14 feet, with a stone fireplace, 2 small windows, and a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. The roof was sound, but the chinking between the logs needed repair. The floor was dirt, packed hard from years of use. But it was theirs, and Clara looked at it the way she had looked at that barren land when she first claimed it, seeing not what it was, but what it could become. They worked on the cabin in every spare moment. Garrett fixed the door and repointed the chinking. Clara scrubbed every surface until the old logs showed their golden color again. They built a proper bed frame from lumber Garrett got at the ranch, wide enough for both of them. Clara sewed curtains from flour sacks she had been saving, and they let light in while providing privacy. They built shelves and a table and 2 sturdy chairs. And most importantly, the cabin was close enough to Clara's garden that she could continue her work. She went there every day, tending her plants as they moved into winter dormancy, planning for the next season. She had saved seeds from the most successful plants, carefully stored in labeled jars. She had notes written in a careful hand about what had worked and what had not, building a personal record of how to farm this particular piece of difficult land. November arrived with crisp mornings and the first frost warnings. Clara worried over her remaining plants, covering them with every scrap of cloth she had when the temperature dropped. Some things died anyway, because that was the nature of frost, and there was only so much you could do. But she accepted these losses with equanimity, already planning for the next year. In mid-November, on an afternoon when the sky had been building clouds all day, the rain finally came. Not a sprinkle or a brief shower, but a real rain, steady and soaking. It started as a patter on the roof that made both Garrett and Clara freeze in place, listening in disbelief. Then it intensified, drumming on the shingles, running off the eaves, soaking into the thirsty ground. Clara ran outside into it, arms spread, face turned up to the sky. Garrett followed her and they stood together in the downpour, laughing like children. The rain soaked through their clothes within seconds, plastered Clara's hair to her head, turned the dry dirt around their cabin into mud, and it was glorious. "It is raining," Clara shouted over the sound of it. "Garrett, it is really raining." He caught her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them giddy with the simple miracle of water falling from the sky. When he set her down, she kissed him fiercely, rain running down both their faces. "The garden," she said suddenly. "I need to check the garden." They ran through the rain to her plot and found the barrels overflowing, the ground drinking deeply, the plants themselves seeming to lift and swell with the moisture. Clara moved among them, touching leaves, checking stems, her face radiant with joy. The rain continued for 3 days, a slow, steady soaking that broke the drought's back. When it finally cleared, the land looked different. Not green, not yet, but alive in a way it had not been in years. Water stood in the low places. The creek ran full for the first time in memory. And Clara's garden, that impossible garden in the driest dirt, flourished. Winter came on gently that year, as if the land was grateful for the moisture and wanted to make the most of it. Garrett continued his work at the Broken Arrow, and Clara continued her planning for the next growing season. They settled into the rhythms of married life, learning each other's habits and quirks, building a partnership that was based on mutual respect and shared work as much as love. On Christmas, Clara gave Garrett a shirt she had sewn from fabric she had somehow acquired and hidden from him. It fit perfectly and was the finest thing he had ever owned. He gave her books he had ordered from a catalog, volumes on farming techniques and plant varieties, and she clutched them like they were made of gold. "How did you know?" she asked, flipping through the pages with reverence. "Because I know you. I know you read everything you can about growing things. I thought these might help." She kissed him with a sweetness that made him glad they had the cabin to themselves, no bunkhouse full of ranch hands to return to. Winter turned to spring, and spring was wet and glorious. The rains continued in gentle regular intervals, and the land exploded with life. Native grasses grew tall and green, wildflowers bloomed in carpets of color. And Clara's garden, expanded now to nearly half an acre, grew with a vigor that seemed almost angry, as if the plants were making up for lost time. She planted everything she had dreamed of during the drought. Tomatoes and beans and squash, yes, but also corn and pumpkins and 3 different kinds of peppers. She started a small herb garden near the cabin. She planted flowers too, practical things like sunflowers that produced seeds but beautiful to look at. Garrett helped whenever he could, and on Sundays they worked together from dawn to dusk. Other people started coming by to see the garden that had become famous in the area. The woman who had made things grow in dead dirt, they called her. Some came seeking advice. Clara shared everything she knew freely, showing them her techniques, giving away seeds and seedlings. "You could sell those," Garrett pointed out after she had given away a flat of tomato starts to a struggling homesteader. "I could," Clara agreed. "But I remember what it was like when I first got here, trying to make something work with almost nothing. If I can help someone else succeed, that matters more than a few coins." By midsummer, the garden was producing more than 2 people could eat. Clara started preserving everything, filling jars with pickles and tomatoes and beans. She dried herbs in bunches hanging from the cabin rafters. She traded surplus vegetables to other homesteaders for things they needed. She even sold some to the general store in Fort Griffin, earning a small income of her own. "You are a farmer," Garrett said one evening, watching her work. "A real farmer. You made this happen, Clara." She looked up from the beans she was snapping, a smile playing at her lips. "We made this happen. I could not have done it without your help, Garrett, without you believing in me. I just helped around the edges. The vision was yours. The work was yours. I am just glad I get to be part of it." In August, Clara realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired, slightly ill in the mornings, and when her monthly courses did not arrive, she began to suspect. When another month passed and the signs became more certain, she told Garrett one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said quietly. "We are going to have a baby." Garrett went very still, processing this information. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing until it was nearly a grin. "A baby, you are sure as I can be. Probably arriving sometime in March or April, I think." He pulled her close, cradling her carefully like she was something fragile. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked. "Happy? I am terrified and thrilled, and so happy I can barely think straight." "You are going to be a wonderful mother." "I hope so. I have no idea what I am doing." "Neither do I. We will figure it out together, the way we figure everything out." The pregnancy progressed through the fall as they harvested the garden and prepared for winter. Clara remained active, refusing to be coddled, though Garrett did his best to take over the heavier tasks. They prepared the cabin for a child, building a cradle from smooth wood and soft blankets. Clara sewed tiny clothes in the evenings while Garrett worked on making the cabin even more weatherproof. Patterson was pleased with the news and assured Garrett that his job was secure, that they would work around whatever was needed when the baby came. The other ranch hands were excited too, already arguing about who would teach the child to ride. Winter was milder than the previous year, with regular snow but nothing extreme. Clara spent the cold months planning the next year's garden, reading her books, preparing for motherhood. Her belly swelled steadily, and Garrett loved to put his hand on it and feel the baby move, evidence of the life they had created. In late March, on a day when the first spring flowers were just beginning to bloom, Clara went into labor. Garrett rode hard to fetch the nearest midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson who lived 10 miles away. She arrived in time to help Clara through the long hours of labor, coaching and encouraging while Garrett paced outside, useless and worried. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the thin wail of a baby crying. He rushed inside to find Clara exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets they had prepared. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced. "Healthy lungs, good size, you have a son." Garrett approached slowly, awestruck. Clara pulled back the blanket to show him a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth open in protest at being born. "A son," Garrett breathed. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Garrett looked at his son, at his wife, at the life they had built in this hard country. "What about Thomas, after my father, Thomas Walsh?" Clara smiled. "Thomas is perfect. Hello, Thomas, welcome to the world." Baby Thomas was a loud presence in their small cabin, demanding and needy in the way of all infants. But he was also perfect, at least to his parents. Garrett discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed. walking the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night so Clara could sleep. Clara learned to nurse and soothe and interpret the different cries that meant hungry or wet or just lonely. Spring arrived fully, and the land was beautiful. The drought was truly broken now, the rains had continued through another year, and everything that had been dormant for so long was thriving. Clara's garden went in later that year because she was recovering from childbirth and caring for an infant, but it went in nonetheless. She worked while Thomas slept in a basket nearby, under the shade of a makeshift canopy. "You cannot just stop living because you have a baby," she told Garrett when he suggested she might want to take the season off. "The garden matters, our food security matters, and Thomas needs to learn from the beginning that we work hard and we take care of things." So the garden grew again, smaller than the previous year but still productive. And Thomas grew too, thriving in the fresh air and sunshine, watched over by parents who loved him fiercely. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, sitting up and starting to show his personality, Garrett had saved enough money to make an offer. He approached Clara one evening with a proposal he had been working on for weeks. "Your original 40 acres, he said, "the land you homesteaded. I have been thinking about it. You proved it can be farmed, that it will produce. What if we bought the adjoining parcels, built something bigger, a real farm, not just a garden?" Clara looked at him thoughtfully. "That would take money. I have some saved." And Patterson mentioned he might be willing to invest, become a silent partner. "He thinks what you are doing is valuable. We could make it work, Clara. We could build something for Thomas, something that would last." She was quiet for a long moment, thinking, then she nodded slowly. "Yes. Let us do it. Let us build something that lasts." It took time and negotiation, but by the time Thomas turned 1 year old, they had secured 3 additional 40-acre parcels around Clara's original claim. It was still modest by ranching standards, but for farming in this country, it was substantial. Garrett continued working for Patterson but spent every spare moment helping Clara develop the new land. They worked the soil the way Clara had worked that original plot, patiently improving it, adding organic matter, learning its quirks and characteristics. They planted more extensively, experimenting with different crops. They built irrigation systems that caught and distributed rainfall more efficiently. They made mistakes and learned from them, always pushing to understand the land better. Word of their success spread. People came from considerable distances to see the farm that had grown from that impossible garden, to learn from the woman who had refused to accept that the land was dead. Clara taught freely, sharing her hard-won knowledge. Some of what she taught was technique, but more of it was attitude. The belief that the land wanted to produce, that it just needed help and patience and stubbornness. Thomas grew into a toddler, sturdy and curious, always underfoot as they worked. He learned to walk between the garden rows, learned the names of plants before he learned much else. His first word was tomato, or a version of it, which made Clara laugh with delight. When Thomas was 2, Clara became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because life was easier in general now. The farm was producing well, they had money saved, the cabin had been expanded into something more comfortable. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, arrived on a crisp October morning. She was tiny and perfect, with Clara's light hair and Garrett's eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, learning to be gentle with this small creature who had joined their family. Life settled into new rhythms. The farm continued to grow, adding livestock now, chickens first and then a few pigs, eventually a milk cow. They built proper outbuildings, a barn and a larger house to replace the cabin they had started in. The new house had 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen and windows that let in light and views of the garden that had started everything. Clara remained the heart of the operation, the one with the vision and the knowledge. But it had become truly a family enterprise, with Garrett managing the business side and the heavier work, and even the children contributing as they grew. Thomas, at 4 years old, could already identify every plant in the garden and was learning to harvest carefully. Rose toddled behind her mother, mimicking her actions, learning through observation. On a warm summer evening when Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, the family sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the sky. The garden spread out before them, lush and productive, proof of what stubbornness and love and hard work could accomplish. Beyond the garden, the fields showed green with growing crops. The livestock made peaceful sounds from the barn. Garrett looked at Clara, at the life they had built, at the children playing at their feet. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. "When I rode up and saw you planting in that dead dirt," Clara smiled, the expression in her eyes soft with memory. "All the time. I was so tired that day, so close to giving up. I had been working for months with barely any progress, wondering if everyone was right and I was crazy for trying. And then you appeared and you did not tell me I was crazy. You said anyone this stubborn belongs here. I was right about that. You were right about a lot of things." She took his hand, squeezed it gently. "You saw what I was trying to do when it was just a dream in terrible soil. You helped me make it real. This farm, this life, our family, it all grew from that moment when you decided to believe in me. You made it easy to believe. You had already done the impossible. I just helped you do more of it." Thomas came over and climbed into Garrett's lap, tired from playing. Rose followed, claiming Clara's lap. They sat like that as the sun disappeared and the stars emerged, a family united by love and work and the shared belief that the land would provide if you treated it right. Years continued to pass, marked by seasons and harvests, by growth and occasional setbacks. When Thomas was 7 and Rose was 5, Clara gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Daniel and Joseph. The family grew louder and more chaotic, the house filled with the sounds of children laughing and arguing and learning. The farm expanded further. Garrett left the Broken Arrow, staying on good terms with Patterson but needing to focus full-time on their own operation. They hired help during planting and harvest, providing work to drifters and neighbors who needed it. Clara continued to experiment with new crops and techniques, always learning, always improving. She taught her children everything she knew about the land. They learned to read the soil, to understand what plants needed, to work with the natural systems rather than fighting them. Thomas showed a particular aptitude for it, inheriting his mother's intuitive understanding of growing things. Rose was more interested in the business side, learning to calculate yields and profits with Garrett. The twins were still young, but already showing their own personalities. Daniel was cautious and methodical, while Joseph was impulsive and creative. Together they balanced each other, much like their parents. The farm became known throughout the region. People spoke of it with respect, this place that had grown from nothing, from dead ground and stubborn hope. When other drought years came, as they inevitably did in this country, farmers came to Clara for advice on how to keep things alive when the rain stopped. She taught them her techniques for water conservation, for choosing hardy varieties, for improving soil so it could retain moisture better. She also taught them the most important lesson, the one that had kept her going that first year, that the land was not an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be understood. That success came from working with what you had, not wishing for something different. On Thomas's 10th birthday, Garrett gave him something special, a section of the farm, 2 acres to manage on his own. "What you grow, you can sell," Garrett explained. "The money is yours, but you do all the work yourself, you make the decisions. This is you learning to be a farmer for real." Thomas accepted the responsibility with the seriousness it deserved. He planned his crops carefully, consulted his mother frequently, and worked long hours in his section. When harvest came and he sold his produce at the market in Fort Griffin, the money he earned was his first taste of real independence. Rose demanded equal treatment, so she was given charge of the chicken operation when she turned 8. She learned to maximize egg production, to keep the birds healthy, to manage the economics of feed versus output. She proved to be a shrewd businesswoman even as a child, negotiating prices that made the storekeepers shake their heads in rueful admiration. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the crops failed despite best efforts, when disease took livestock, when market prices dropped below profitability. There were the normal struggles of raising children, of disagreements and worries, and the thousand small difficulties of daily life. But through it all, Garrett and Clara held to what had brought them together: the belief in hard work, in stubbornness, in the fundamental possibility of making something from nothing. They held to each other too, their love deepening over years of shared labor and shared joy. When Thomas was 14, he asked his father how he had known his mother was the right woman to marry. They were working together on repairing a fence, the kind of task that allowed for conversation. Garrett considered the question carefully. "I saw her planting a garden in dirt that everyone knew was dead. I saw her refuse to accept that it was impossible. And I thought anyone with that kind of determination, that kind of vision, was someone worth knowing." The love came after, but it was built on that respect, on recognizing that she was someone special. "Do you still think she is special?" Thomas asked. "Every single day, your mother is the strongest person I have ever met, not physically, though she is plenty tough. But strong in her spirit, in her refusal to give up on things that matter. That garden was impossible, but she made it happen. This farm was impossible, but here it is. She makes the impossible happen because she does not accept that it is impossible." Thomas absorbed this, working quietly for a few moments. "I want to find someone like that someday, someone strong." "You will. Just make sure you recognize it when you see it, and make sure you are worthy of it, because strength deserves strength." The conversation stayed with Garrett for days afterward, making him reflective. He watched Clara with fresh eyes, seeing her not just as his wife but as the remarkable person she had always been. Still rising before dawn to check the crops, still experimenting with new techniques, still teaching anyone who asked, still being the heart of everything they had built. That evening, after the children were asleep, he pulled her outside to look at the stars, something they had not done in a while amid the busyness of life. "What is this about?" Clara asked, curious but willing. "I just wanted to remind you that I love you, that I see what you do every day and I am grateful for it. For you." Clara leaned against him, comfortable in his arms after all these years. "I love you too, and I am grateful you stopped that day all those years ago. That you saw what I was trying to do and decided to help instead of just telling me I was foolish." "You were foolish," Garrett said with a smile. "Wonderfully, beautifully foolish, and I am so glad you were." They stood under the stars, two people who had built a life from stubborn ground, from impossible dreams, from the simple decision to work together toward something better. The children grew toward adulthood. Thomas became a fine farmer, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation of the farm as Garrett's back began to protest the harder work. Rose married a merchant from Fort Griffin, a good man who respected her business sense and supported her involvement in the farm. She remained a partner in the operation even after her marriage, coming by regularly to review the books and help with planning. Daniel chose to become a teacher, drawn to education and books in a way the rest of the family was not. He moved to Fort Griffin to teach at the schoolhouse there, visiting often but following his own path. Joseph stayed on the farm, showing a talent for working with animals and machinery that made him invaluable as farming became more mechanized. Grandchildren arrived, a new generation to run through the gardens and learn about the land. Clara taught them the same lessons she had taught her own children, about patience and observation and the fundamental partnership between people and earth. On a warm spring day when Clara was 50 years old and Garrett was 54, they walked through the farm together, something they tried to do regularly. The original garden, the impossible one that had started everything, was still there, maintained almost as a memorial. The tomatoes and beans and squash still grew in that one-stead soil, still produced despite the odds. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked. Coming out here, claiming that awful land, working yourself nearly to death to make it produce, Clara laughed. Never, not once. This life, this farm, our family, it is everything I wanted even when I did not know I wanted it. Yes, it was hard. Yes, there were times I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake, but I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even if I had not come along, even if you had been alone. She thought about that seriously. I would have been sadder, lonelier, but I still would have made the garden grow. I needed to prove it was possible, Garrett. I needed to know that I could make something beautiful in a hard place, but I am so grateful I did not have to do it alone. That you saw what I was trying to do and joined me. You made everything better, richer, more meaningful. You made me believe in things again, Garrett said. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working, surviving, but not really building toward anything. You showed me what was possible when you committed fully to something. You changed my life, Clara. They stood in the garden, surrounded by the results of decades of work, and kissed like they were young again, like it was that first time in the rain. The love had deepened and matured, had weathered challenges and celebrated joys, but it was still fundamentally the same love. Built on respect, on shared work, on the recognition of strength in each other. The years continued their steady march. Clara remained active well into her 60s, still working in the garden though she left the heavier farm work to her children and grandchildren. Garrett developed arthritis, but stayed involved in planning and management, his experience valuable even when his body could not do what it once had. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around, a noisy, joyful affair that filled the farmhouse to bursting. Thomas, now married himself and running the farm with his brother Joseph, gave a toast. "My mother planted a garden in dead dirt," he said, raising his glass. "Everyone said it was impossible, but she did it anyway. And my father, when he saw what she was trying to do, did not tell her it was impossible. He said anyone that's stubborn belongs here." They built this farm, this family, this life from nothing but hard work and love. They taught us that impossible just means you have to work harder, that the land will provide if you treat it right, that stubbornness and determination can overcome almost anything. To my parents. To Clara and Garrett, the assembled family echoed, and the love in the room was almost tangible. Late that night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Clara and Garrett sat on their porch watching the stars. It was something they had done countless times over the decades, but it never got old. 40 years, Clara said softly. 40 years since we stood in that church in Fort Griffin and promised to build a life together. Best decision I ever made, Garrett said. Me too. She took his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. "Do you remember what you said that first day, when you saw the garden?" "I said a lot of things that first day. You said anyone stubborn enough to plant a garden in the driest dirt probably belongs here, even if they do not know what they are in for," Garrett smiled. "I remember." "And I was right, was I not? You belonged here, you still belong here. We belong here," Clara corrected gently. "Both of us. We built this together, Garrett. The garden was mine, but everything that came after that was ours." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had spent a lifetime learning each other, who could communicate in the quiet as well as in words. The night was cool but not cold, full of the sounds of growing things and living creatures. The farm around them was dark but not empty, full of life and potential even in the darkness. Clara thought about that young woman she had been, alone and desperate and stubborn, kneeling in dead dirt with a basket of seedlings. She thought about everything that had grown from that moment, the literal crops and the metaphorical ones. A farm, a family, a legacy of showing people that difficult land could still be coaxed into abundance. She thought about the cowboy who had ridden up that day and seen not a foolish woman making a doomed attempt, but someone worth helping, someone worth believing in, someone worth loving. "I love you," she said, not because she needed to, but because it was true and because some truths bore repeating. After 40 years after everything, I love you more than I did when we started. I love you too, Garrett said. Always have, always will. They sat under the stars, two people who had planted their own lives in difficult ground and made them flourish, surrounded by the evidence that stubbornness and love and hard work could transform even the most impossible dreams into reality. The garden still grew in what had once been the driest dirt, and so did everything that mattered. Clara lived to be 78 years old, still working in her garden until the very end, still teaching anyone who would listen about the partnership between people and land. When she passed, it was peacefully in her sleep, with Garrett beside her and her children nearby. They buried her on the farm she had created in sight of that original garden and planted flowers over her grave that bloomed extravagantly every spring. Garrett lived another 5 years, cared for by his children, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He spent his days on the porch, watching the farm continue, watching new generations learn the lessons Clara had taught about stubbornness and soil and growing impossible things. He told stories about their early days, about the woman who had planted in dead dirt, about the garden that should not have grown but did anyway. He told about their courtship conducted while working side by side, about the life they had built from almost nothing. And when his time came, at 83 years old, he went peacefully, his last words about Clara and the garden and the absolute certainty that she was waiting for him somewhere beyond. The farm continued, passed down through generations, each one learning the lessons of that first impossible garden, that the land would provide if treated right, that stubbornness mattered, that working together made all things possible, that love built on respect and shared dreams could weather any drought. And in the driest dirt, where nothing should have grown, Clara's garden continued to flourish, generation after generation, a living testament to one woman's refusal to accept impossible, and to the man who saw that stubbornness and knew it was exactly where it belonged. The story of the cowboy and the woman with the impossible garden became local legend, then regional history, the kind of story people told when they wanted to illustrate what the best of frontier life had looked like. Not the violence or the hardship, though both were present, but the determination. The stubborn, beautiful determination to make something grow where everyone said nothing could. Years became decades, became a century. And still the farm remained, still productive, still teaching the lessons Clara had learned and taught. The original garden was maintained as a historical site eventually, preserved as the place where it all began, where a young woman with nothing but determination and seedlings had refused to accept that the land was dead, where a cowboy had seen what she was doing and recognized something worth believing in, worth helping, worth loving, where impossible dreams took root in the driest dirt and grew into something that would last forever.